Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the second yearly video where I discuss all of the books and comic books, graphic novels, etc. that I've read this year. Uh, I have not read as many as I did last year. Last year I had two huge stacks. This year I've only got like one big stack and one slightly smaller but still pretty decent sized stack. I've been on a kind of a time crunch. I'm not going to get into this video. That's a video for tomorrow though. But today, let's jump into the first thing I read this year, which was Journey to the West. Woo, yeah! This took me so long to get through. I started this in the last week of last year, and I finished it around, I want to say, April or May of this year. And I'm happy I read it. I'm not going to lie. I'm very proud of myself that I managed to read this entire thing. The only thing is, I would not, if you do want to read this, which I would recommend it if you're a fan of mythology or even just Chinese culture in general, I would not recommend reading it front to back the way I did. The best thing about this book is that like every 3 or 4 chapters is kind of sectioned off into its own smaller story that can easily work as like its own personal episode. So you could like read another book, come back, read a couple chapters of this, read another book, blah blah blah, and then you'd be able to get through it pretty easily. It's not like, say, the Divine Comedy where it's kind of just straight all the way through. You have to start from start to finish. No, you could like easily, feasibly take breaks with this. And it was very good. I'm happy I got to read it. And I honestly, like, it's kind of funny because, like, I also was watching the OSP videos for this series. It's what got me into the idea of trying to read Journey to the West in the first place. And they just did an episode the other day with the Ox King chapters, which are my favorite part of the book. And if you want to check out Journey to the West, but you don't have the time to read the entire thing, definitely check out the OSP videos. They're very good. Moving on from there, though, I read all 4 of the Aragon books and the new one, Fork, Witch, and the Worm. And I also bought Murtagh. I have not read it yet, but I bought it. That was the third time. Third time I've had to record this video. Always the third time's the charm. But I bought Murtagh when it came out. I have yet to read it yet because I wanted to take a break from Aragon and fantasy in general. Now I want to make it plain right now. I did not hate Aragon. I thought it was actually really good. It had some great concepts, but overall, the pacing was so muddled. Like, you're making a fantasy series that takes place during a war, and you feel like the things that are important to focus on are forging a sword, the diplomatic process of the dwarves, and like there's so many pacing problems in that series. And I understand he was young. He was like 18 when he wrote Aragon. And I honestly, like, I've heard Murtagh's really good. And I'm hoping that, you know, now that he's had time after the Aragon series ended, he had plenty of time to develop as a writer and become better. So I'm hoping that the future entries in the series will be actually able to capitalize on all of the things from the Aragon series that I thought were really good. Like, I like the magic system, but I feel like it's a little bit too structured for its own good, considering the fact that, like, the entire concept is based around words and stuff, right? Like, the ancient language and whatnot. But that eventually becomes moot when Aragon and Murtagh learn the name of the ancient name of magic itself and can just kind of do whatever they want with it. Or they learn how to or Aragon starts trying to cast spells without using words. Like, it's an interesting idea. Don't get me wrong. I think the way it's handled is really good because, like, it's ultimately your own knowledge of the magic system itself determines how powerful you are, which is always a great way to write a magic system. But it just feels like it's trying to be too structured while at the same time giving you Tolkien level, like, a wizard did it kind of stuff. But like I said, hopefully the future books in the series will come out and capitalize on all the great things about the series, and maybe even fix some of my other problems with it. But moving on from there, I read a book called Leech by Hiran Ennis, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of these names. I don't really like talking crap about books. As a writer myself, I understand how difficult it can be to put something out there in the world that you think people will want to read, that you enjoyed writing and all that. It is a lot of work and a huge accomplishment to write any novel. That being said, this was not good. I did not enjoy this the way I thought I would. I picked it up because this little text blurb right here on the side said The Thing meets the Alienist. And while I have no idea what the Alienist is, I know what The Thing is. I love The Thing. The Thing is fantastic. It is a work of art. Horrifying art, no less, but a work of art. And the entire premise is basically like this, a doctor who has a connection to like a hive mind entity, basically, in a world that's very much not Earth, but that's never explained, goes to this chateau to find out what killed one of their bodies that they lost contact with, and discovers like this weird parasitic thing, right? And it's like this bizarre miracle virus where it's like it reproduces through heat. It can survive without a host. It takes over the host and they don't realize, and it can get bigger and bigger, and it's just like and then like halfway through, the entire premise of like the Institute hive mind thing gets dropped. And it's very disappointing because they switch it out for like, it's revealed at the end like this creature infected the doctor and it was slowly eating away at like the Institute virus in their head as they were like waging a war and shit in each other, and that's why the doctor was having like so many problems and whatnot. And it's just like, the world of this book seems more interesting than the actual book itself, because the ending has the doctor character running away after they've been freed with this other person, and they get trapped by like this thing called a Ventigo, which is kind of like a Wendigo, I guess. And it summons a blizzard around them. It traps them in a cabin. It's trying to kill them. It's like really interesting, and it's just like, that's so much more interesting than almost anything else that happens in the book. And I hate to say it, because I thought this was going to be a good book, but there's so many plot threads in this book that just go freaking nowhere. Like, it's never explained what the virus is. It's never explained... It's, like, never explained, like, what the Institute's going to do about it. How much of a threat does this pose? Like, is this just going to be in this isolated area? Or are they going to be able to like, quarantine it off and slowly kill everything? Like, it's just... The whole thing feels like a lot of wasted potential. Like, the author had a brilliant idea but did not have the skill to execute it. And I hate to talk crap about it because it does feel like they put a lot of effort into creating this book, creating this story. But it just did not work. And I'm sorry, I hate talking crap about books. I know that one day there will be some dude on the internet talking shit about one of something I wrote. And yeah, I get it. It sucks. But like, criticism is valid as long as it has backing. If you're hating something because it's just like, I don't like it because of the genre it's in, that's not a reason to hate it. But that's not the point for this video. Moving on to something I can be more positive about. T. Kingfisher's The Twisted Ones. Now, honestly, I thought this book was fine. I did not get sucked into this the way I do some of like the best horror novels I've ever read. But when you're talking about the upper echelon of Stephen King novels, you gotta temper your expectations a little bit. But, honestly, this whole story was very well put together, very good, very suspenseful. I enjoyed it, even though it leaves a couple threads dangling. It's still it's still enough. Like, there's a satisfying enough conclusion to it, I guess you could say. The entire premise actually reads like an extended creepypasta. Like, this woman goes to her her grandmother's house to find out her grandmother's become a hoarder, and she starts cleaning it out and finds like her step grandfather's notebook that has a phrase in it that gets stuck in her head, and then like all kinds of weird crap just starts happening. Like, now obviously creepypastas are a mixed bag. I've heard some that are fantastic, and I've heard some that are absolute dog water. But this one, I think, would have actually worked as a shorter story. I feel like the extending it out to the length of a full-length novel is probably what ultimately did not work for me. But I still think, like, there's definitely potential for this. Maybe I'm just not the right kind of person to get sucked into this specific novel, but I will definitely check out some more of Kingfisher's work in the future. I've heard a lot of great things about her writing and her writing style, so I'm very much excited to look into her more in the future. After that, I read Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero, I believe. Once again, I apologize if I mispronounce these names. I am not very good at this. And honestly, this was very good. I enjoyed this one a lot. The writing style is very fun. The entire premise is Scooby-Doo meets Lovecraft, where these kids solved a mystery in the 70s and put a guy in a mask behind bars, only to be traumatized because all of the stuff that happened that night actually happened. Like, there was a real monster. And it was very good. My only real flaw with this, and this is going to sound kind of bad to say, is that it threw in a love story between a lesbian and a straight woman, only to put them in a relationship at the end of the book and confirm that they still have not been physical with each other because the straight woman is still only attracted to men. Or at least not attracted to the woman yet. Now, I am heteroromantic, asexual. I'm only attracted to the opposite gender of myself. So I don't know how common it actually is in, like, say, the lesbian or the gay community to be in that sort of situation. I understand romantic love eventually can breed sexual love, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Like, sometimes you gotta swallow it and just be like, no, that's a dumb plot line. Especially when you consider the fact that, like, the lesbian character goes through no character development, and she is 100% the worst character in this book. Like, there's a scene where the bully apologizes to them, right? Like, there's obviously a bully character in this kind of story. Like, he apologizes to them in a public diner that he's working at, and her reaction is to slam his face into food, when everybody else was just keen to forgive him and move on past it. Like, there's a part where they're trying to create a protective barrier and they need, like, some sort of sample or whatever to make it, to, like, put up the whole barrier. And they think they need just blood. And he's like, I'm not bleeding. And the bully's like, I'm not bleeding. And she goes to, like, her immediate move is to rush across and go to punch him in the face, only to be stopped by the nerd of the group, say, hey, yo, no, we just need, like, spit or something. Like, it just, I don't know. I would still recommend it if you can get past that element of the story. But it's, it was a very interesting book. The ending, I think, sticks it pretty well for a mystery novel. There's a lot of interesting plot twists in here that you don't see coming. And a lot of genuinely heartfelt moments in here. Like, there's a lot of really fun moments in here. A lot of comedy. My favorite, and the part that will always stick out to me, is how they get one of the characters out of a psychiatric ward, which I'm not going to spoil here. But if you want to find out what happens, go read this book. Speaking of things I'm not going to spoil, the next book I read this year, since I finished that one pretty close to like mid-October, The Last House on Needless Street. This book sucked me in with the force of a vacuum. And it was one of the most fantastic pieces of horror fiction I have ever read. I would put this up there with my favorite Stephen King novels of all time. That's how good this book was. I don't even want to spoil anything. I don't even want to tell you the premise of this book. All I need to do is turn it around and show you this. Named one of the 50 best horror books of all time. If you think you know how this book ends, you don't know how this book ends. And that's all I'm going to say, because I recommend this book to anyone who likes mysteries, who likes horror, who likes scary stories. Any one of those three genres right there, if you like that, you need to check this book out. This book is fantastic. Moving on to the last book I read this year, The Paleontologist. Much like Leech, this was one that got me simply by the premise alone. Basically, this... Excuse me. Basically, this paleontologist gets a job at the museum where his kid sister went missing 20 years ago. And... was it 20 or... No, it was like 30 years ago, because it happened in like 1990, and the book takes place during 2020 and 2021. So like 30 years ago, whatever. And he starts seeing ghost dinosaurs. I'm going to let that sink in. Okay. Now, this was actually a very interesting read. My biggest problem is it doesn't feel like the ending kind of combines all the plot threads together. Like, there's this whole like plot line with like an evil ghost dinosaur that's attacking everything in the museum, and he attacks the main character, and oh my god. And then it's just like he can't figure out what it is. He's like, how do I know what it is? Like, I remember how the foot looked, and I remember like the teeth and all that, and it's like, at the end of it, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, my colleague figured it out for me. And I'm like, well, thanks, I guess. Glad to know it had nothing to do with the freaking story itself. But, I'd still recommend this. It was a very good read. I enjoyed it. I don't know if I would... I will probably check out more of the author in the future. I just kind of hope that he gets a little bit better at writing mysteries. The key to writing a good mystery is you start at the end. You figure out who did it, what happened, when, where, etc. And then you work your way back. That is the key to every good mystery novel. But this was still a pretty good one. Moving on from there, we got the comic books, manga, and graphic novels I've read this year. And we're going to start off with the 3 Junji Ito ones. Soichi, Mimi's Tales of Terror, and Tombs. Starting off with the one I didn't like the most, Soichi. Now look, a author writing about a character that they find fascinating is a pretty common trope. If anything, you could argue that every main character is basically that. But you have to actually put in the freaking work to make your audience care, otherwise it's just freaking boring, and I do not like Soichi. I don't like the storyline. I don't like any of that. It's not even scary. Like, there's just so much in that book that just feels so bland, so uninteresting. Mimi's Tales of Terror. This one was alright. Not too great, not too bad. Basically, it's a girl who sees all kinds of weird stuff going around her town and everything. It was interesting. It kept me invested a little bit better than Soichi did. Now, Tombs is another one of the short story collections by Junji Ito, and it has my favorite Junji Ito story of all time, The Window Next Door. Now, why that's my favorite is because something about the horror trope of something trying to invade your space, invade the areas that you feel safe in, is always terrifying. And if you've read the story, you know where I'm going with that. And if you haven't, you should at least watch one of the YouTube videos on it online. There's plenty of dramatic readings on YouTube you could find that are actually really well done. Moving on from manga, though, I have been wanting to talk about this one for a while. And I actually talked about this a lot with a lot of my friends in real life. And if you're one of my friends watching this video for whatever reason, I'm sorry that you're going to have to hear about this again. This is My Favorite Thing is Monsters by M.L. Ferris. Now let me see if I can pull up a picture here, because you need to see just what got me in to buy this in the first place. I'm not an artistic person. I admit that. But I can appreciate beautiful artwork. And this is absolutely beautiful artwork. And my favorite thing about it, you really want to know what my favorite thing is? Look at the detail right here. Those are personally put in notebook lines. There is a bend in the corner that's not from me, that's drawn in. There's binding. There's holes from the freaking notebook. This is specifically designed to look like it was drawn in a child's notebook, and it is so beautiful. Oh my god, I love this so much. And this is one of the few times I've ever actually picked something up simply based on the artwork. And it's got a good story too. I like the story for what it's worth. I could gush about the artwork all day, but obviously, you gotta have a story to go with such beautiful artwork. And the story is this young girl in the 60s who is investigating why her upstairs neighbor died. Her upstairs neighbor was a Holocaust survivor, and there's all kinds of different plot threads and everything going on. This is only volume 1. There's a second one coming out in April, which I can't wait for. I'm not sure if that will tie up everything, but if it does, I hope that's at least satisfying. Because there's a lot of stuff going on with this story, and I can't wait to get my hands on the next one. If there's any other recommendation besides Last House on Needless Street you need to hear today, it's that you need to read this. This is art. And I can't stress enough how just gorgeous this thing is. But anyway, moving on from me gushing about a person's drawing skills that I don't have any possession of. I went on a TMNT kick back in June, I think, because of the new movie. And I read The Last Ronin and the first volume of the TMNT IDW run. Both of these are legendary pieces of comic material if you are a TMNT fan. I just want to say real quick while I'm thinking about it. I'm not going to throw up a spoiler because this is 3 years old at this point. The choice to make Michelangelo the Last Ronin works so well. Because he's the only one who could have went through a story like that. And I'm very excited. I've heard rumors, and I've seen stuff on Facebook and whatnot, about them planning on continuing in the same timeline with a new batch of mutated turtles, which was hinted at the end of this one. Which, if they do that, I would be very intrigued to see where they could take that. But the IDW run is legendary in the TMNT circles. Widely regarded to be the best TMNT comic book run, period, by many fans. And I can't wait to dive more into this, because the first 10 chapters of this are pretty solid. Pretty enjoyable. I know that there are some characters who became so popular in the IDW run that they've made appearances in other media of TMNT, like the mutant fox chick from 2012, Alapex. She appeared in this. Her debut chapter is chapter 6 or 7. And it's very good. I actually have plans in the future, hopefully I'll be able to get around to it this year, where I actually want to go over each volume individually and make a video on it discussing it, because there's some stuff that happens in the IDW comics that, as a TMNT fan myself, someone who grew up on like the 2012 series, the 2003 series, I'm very curious to get to and very excited to see. Moving on from there, as another childhood favorite of mine, Danny Phantom, A Glitch in Time. This was very good, very lovely graphic novel for fans of Danny Phantom to get some closure and also some hints to the future. I don't know what all is going on with Butch Hartman. I try to keep my nose out of that kind of stuff because it's not my not the reason I consume media and whatnot. But I can easily say that if Gabriella Epstein continues on making graphic novels or writing, or even gets to write an entire season of the show itself to come back to, I'd be on board with it, because the story of this was fantastic. The artwork was really good once you got used to it not really looking like Danny Phantom. And it was very good. I enjoyed this a lot. If you're a fan of Danny Phantom, obviously you should have checked this out when it came out. The main story is basically like Dark Danny gets free and merges with Clockwork, and everything just starts going to crap. Very good. And I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I would much rather you just read it for yourself. So, to no one's surprise, if you paid attention to what happened in July of this year, July of this year, I read a bunch of Godzilla comics this year. I read Godzilla vs. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which is actually getting a volume 2. That was just announced a couple weeks ago, I believe. And honestly, this was not the worst thing ever, but it was not my favorite either. Because I just, so much of this just felt like they were just throwing different kaiju at the Power Rangers combined with, like, Rita's monsters. And it's like, I understand that's kind of all you're going to be here for if you're a fan of either one of these, but I was hoping for a little bit more story. Maybe we'll get that in the second volume. I read Godzilla the Half-Century War, which was pretty interesting. It's basically like Moby Dick, but with kaiju. I know that sounds like an insult. It's not. This dude here on the cover becomes super obsessed with Godzilla, and basically goes Captain Ahab and trying to kill Godzilla the entire time, and eventually learns to just live with Godzilla. He even takes up Mechagodzilla at the end and helps Godzilla fight a couple different kaiju. Very interesting. Very interesting. Probably the best of the ones I read this year. Although I could argue also, you know, Kingdom of Monsters was fantastic too. The kaiju selection in here was actually really good. The story was pretty good with the guy and his, I guess, adopted daughter following Godzilla trying to stay alive. But this was pretty good. I like this one. And then Godzilla Unnatural Disasters, which was a compilation of Legends in Hell and Rage Against Time. 3 famous, I guess, runs of Godzilla comics. They're very divisive in the fan base. I know that much at least, because, or at least when you talk about power scaling, they're very divisive. I don't really get too much into power scaling, but it's still a, you know, it's still good, still worth a read. Following that, this one here. I read Secret Reverse, a Marvel comic written by Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this was a hard one to read. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not bad. I want to emphasize that right now. This is not bad. It's not hard to read because it's bad. It's hard to read because Yu-Gi-Oh! is such a huge part of my life. And Kazuki Takahashi passed away, was it last year or the year? No, it was last year. He passed away last year because I got my Dark Magician tattoo, which I don't know if you can see too well here. I got my Dark Magician tattoo last year. Fantastic piece of artwork done by an amazing tattoo artist. And he died last year. And being such a huge part of my life, it was pretty hard to read this. Because I was getting sad the entire time. That being said, though, he did get a chance to write a Marvel comic with two of his favorite Marvel heroes. Which is an achievement very few people can make. And I hope he rests in peace, knowing that he did them very well in here. There's a lot of it that there's moments where it's just like straight up Yu-Gi-Oh. Like obviously, you know, it's Kazuki Takahashi. It's got to revolve around card games. But the whole thing, if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, you should definitely check this out. It's very good. It's not fantastic. It's probably not his best work, but it's enjoyable. It's fun. You can sit through it and get through an afternoon. Very good. And it will definitely kick you in the heart, knowing that he got to do that in like 2019. And then finally, the last two things to talk about today is the last two volumes of Lore Olympus, Volumes 4 and Volumes 5. I'm just going to give my thoughts on these real quick. They were very good. The stakes are escalating up pretty quick. I'm very curious to see what happens next. If you've read the webcomic, do not spoil it for me, please. I still love the art style of that, but I've gushed enough about art style, I think, today. What's going on with the back of my head? How long is that? Oh, well. So, yeah, that was everything I read this year. Hopefully next year I'll get a little bit bigger stack to talk about. And I'll see you guys then.